All right, my friends, time for the hands-free drive to work, because you can keep your hands on the wheel and at the very same time have a conversation about steering yourself through the weeds of work. What we've been talking about the whole time is steering ourselves through the weeds of work, being great self-managers. And if we want to be great self-managers, what we said is we have to learn to act differently. If we act the same way we've always acted, we're going to get the same results we've always gotten. So to act differently, to learn to act differently, first we have to learn to decide differently. And to learn to decide differently, we first have to learn to think differently. And so that's what we've been doing. We've been thinking differently about our work and how to steer ourselves through the weeds of work. Now we're talking about how to decide differently, how to make decisions differently on a day-to-day basis, because as a self-manager, nobody's going behind you making sure that you make all the right decisions, and the 1,000 decisions you have to make today. You have to do a lot of that on your own. You have to steer yourself. More and more, Peter Drucker said, knowledge workers are going to have to learn how to manage themselves instead of just be managed. And so, thinking about how to decide differently is a huge, huge part of being a great self-manager. And so we're going to continue that conversation. What we actually said about deciding differently is that we make decisions from our identity, not from a pros and cons list. You know this. You don't go throughout your day making pros and cons lists. A lot of times you just say, here's what I'm going to do next. You make that decision, even subconsciously sometimes, and it's from your identities, according to James March, our Stanford researcher. He said we make those decisions according to our identity, not a pros and cons list. We don't say, what should I do? We say, what would somebody like me do? And we don't even think through that. It's just kind of like, you've heard people say something like this. Well, I'll tell you, nobody's going to do that to somebody like me. Or my mama didn't raise a, whatever. So we just make those decisions because we just know that's who I am. And we make those decisions based off of, that assessment of ourselves that we have even subconsciously. And so we said if we're going to affect our decisions, since they're made from identity, we have to affect our identity somehow. We have to change our identity. And we said we know an identity is really a collection of character traits. Just like, for example, water always acts like water. Identity is us, who we are. So Casey always acts like Casey. Water always acts like water. And water has properties. It's made up of 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, H2O. You know this. H2O is water, and it always acts like water. And if you change the properties of water, if you made it H2O2, which is peroxide, obviously you're going to have a completely different substance. So that's what we have to do. We have to go to our core and start to look at those core character traits that make up me. And then I change those, and when I do, now peroxide always acts peroxide, water always acts like water, Casey always acts like Casey, the new version of Casey always acts like the new version of Casey. So we change the decisions that we make indirectly by changing those core traits and starting to develop new core traits. And so here we are. One of those core traits, we've talked about a few, but one of these core traits is joy. I know that's surprising to you to say, oh, of course, you're talking about, we should be happy. But no, think about it a little more. If we're going to be great self-managers, I think we have to learn to develop the character trait of joy. We have to be defined by somebody who has joy. And we said the 3 E's of character trait development are explained, example, and experience. So first we'll start off with explain. What is joy? It's not really hard for me to explain what joy is when everything's going exactly right. And so when we talk about steering ourselves through the weeds of work, a lot of times we don't need help steering ourselves through a raise. If I got a raise today, or if my business just landed a new contract, how do you have joy in that? I don't think we need a ton of help when it comes to that. But what we need help with often is the weeds of work, the times when things are frustrating or annoying or disappointing or seem mundane. That's what we need help with. So really joy, according to Shawn Achor, who is a Harvard-trained research scientist, he said joy in trials actually works like this. He said we have moved joy out past our ability to even attain it. Shawn Achor said our current way we look at joy moves joy past where we can attain it. I'm going to pull over so I can talk to you right now. Joy, he said, according to Shawn Achor, he said we have a formula like this. Joy is we work hard, we become successful, and then we're happy. We work hard, we become successful, and then we're happy. And so he said what we did, we've moved it to a point where we can never actually achieve it. Because once we work hard and gain success, our formula is still the same. So from where we are here, we still are thinking work hard, get success, happy. And so even though we went from work hard, get success, happy, we thought happiness was here. But when we get here, our formula doesn't change. So we work hard, get success, and now happy has moved over just a little bit. So Shawn Achor says under that current model, we cannot achieve happiness. And so he says we have to change what we think about happiness. Happiness is accepting that right where we are is right where we should be. True joy is accepting that right where we are is right where we should be. And the reason that's difficult in a trial is because often we don't want to be in a trial. We don't want to be frustrated. We don't want to be annoyed. But Shawn Achor said the key to experiencing joy, even when there's tough times going on in our lives, is accepting that those things are learning experiences. And so every time that we're going through something annoying or difficult, to have joy in that moment is to see those things not as just deterring us from our preferred future, not deterring us from the possibilities that we want to reach, but that those things are teaching us and training us to have the best possibilities in the future we can have. And so that's joy. That is experiencing life joyfully. That's what joy explained really is. It's not looking at our circumstances and saying that, okay, things around me, if this will change, and then I get here, and then I get here, I'll have joy. It's saying that I'm going to accept that today. It's just today, right where I am, is right where I should be. I'm going to be thankful for even tough things that come my way. So that's joy explained. Second is that we need a power. If we're going to start to develop that in our lives, we need a powerful, we need a powerful example of joy under stress. And this powerful example of somebody learning from their own trials. And, not long ago, I went to a Catalyst conference down in Atlanta. And when I was at this Catalyst conference, there was a speaker, and she was incredible. She gripped my attention. She gripped my attention because she's a great speaker, but she gripped my attention even more with her incredible story. And her name's Christine Caine. And she started a global organization. This made me feel tiny whenever I heard her mission statement. It was to end slavery everywhere. That's Christine Caine's mission statement, to end slavery everywhere. I mean, that's a massive mission, if you ask me. And so I was sitting there listening to her, and I'm thinking, good grief, she's saying, I want to end slavery everywhere. And I was thinking, what kind of passion this person has. And she began to tell her story. And as a young lady, she was actually abused. She was actually abused as a young lady and sexually mistreated. And so she began to see that, obviously a great, massive trial that I can't even start to relate to. But she began to see that as a learning experience and something that would drive her, that would steer her toward making sure that other young ladies who are in that same predicament, in that same slavery, can be freed. She saw her greatest trial as a learning experience. She saw her greatest trial as something that would teach her how not only to live her own life, but how to make an impact on those around her. Christine Caine is an incredible example of putting herself under stress so that others could experience joy. She took a life. Now that she has a life where she's speaking and she's making a big impact, she could just say, you know what, life's about me, and I'm pretty happy with the things that I've achieved. But what she does, she continues over and over again to put herself under stress so that others can experience the joy of freedom and goodness. Thank the Lord for Christine Caine and the work that her organization is doing. You see, when I see that powerful example, how that she can do that in her own life, how that one, she learned from her tragedy, but two, that she continues to put herself under stress so that others can experience joy, that starts to do something in me. It starts to change the very properties of who I am. I can see new possibilities of what I can do with my own circumstances. I can develop joy even in tough circumstances in my own life. But number three, so we've got it explained. We need a great example in Christine Kane, but 3, we need to experience joy. We need to remember the times, and joy is a little different. We need to remember sometimes when somebody has put themselves under stress for me so that I can experience joy in the moment. There are times, you know this, when people share your burden or share your frustration or disappointment or annoyance, there's times when that brings you joy in that moment because you have somebody there with you sharing in your suffering, sharing in your, I know that's a big word, suffering. We can't always say that we're suffering, but we always have frustrations or disappointments when we're steering ourselves through the weeds of work and somebody comes under that frustration or tries to come and help us through those weeds, then we can experience joy in that moment. And so to start to develop that character trait of joy, it's powerful when we remember those times when someone's done it for us. And now it gives us power in the moment to be able to turn around and put ourselves under stress so that someone else around us can experience joy. So for me, a very simple example. It's very personal. But these happen constantly in our lives. Sometimes we need to remember them and recall them. But there was a time not long ago when I came into a new position, and in that new position, there were some people who were pointing fingers and saying some things that were not actually true about me. And so whenever I came into that new position, and I would tell you some of the things, but some of them were crazy. They were just not true at all. And so there was a meeting, and we were going to kind of hash these things out and make sure who was telling the truth. And I had a brand new boss at the time. And he actually walked into that room, and he didn't have to be there. He was actually new to his position, just like I was new to mine. And really coming under some fire for him would actually draw some attention to him and take some of that stress that was on me and put it on him. And he didn't have to show up at that meeting, but he did. He came into that meeting. He sat down right beside me, and he began to really answer more of the questions than I did. He began to stand up for me when people falsely accused, and he actually took the stress on himself so that I could have joy in the moment, so I could continue to learn from this experience and learn what I wanted to see in my own business, what I wanted to see in the way that I managed people and the way that I've learned to trust people. But he actually took on the blunt of a lot of that on himself and come under great stress himself so that I could experience joy in the moment. And so I remember that sometimes. Listen, there's times, obviously, when we all can either shrink back or we can stand up for somebody around us. There's some times when we can either go and hide and try to save ourselves, or we can make sure that somebody who's in the right, that we speak up for that person. And when I remember that he did that for me, man, I start to have joy even in those moments where I can stand up for somebody else. And it seems like, well, I'm about to put myself under some stress, but I'm like, no, this is a time when somebody's put stress, come under stress for me. And so I can come under stress for somebody else. And I experience that not as stress and disappointment, but I experience it as a joy. I'm glad to actually do it because I know how great of a time it was for me when he did that for me. And so I can walk into this new time and take on the stress, but I can see it as a joyful moment. Do you see how powerful that can be? We have joy explained. We have a great example of joy, and then we remember the times that we've experienced joy in our own lives because somebody else put themselves under stress for us. When we start to do that, it changes the absolute core characteristics of who we are. And then in the moment when we don't have time to make a pros and cons list, we just start to make brand new decisions. And listen, we've said this, with brand new decisions come brand new possibilities. That's what we're talking about. The future possibilities. Some that we can change, some that we cannot. Some that we can know, some that we cannot. But those future possibilities become literally limitless when we begin to develop these brand new character traits. When new traits come new possibilities. Hey, thank y'all for listening to Hands Free Drive to Work. If you can remember a time when somebody has put themselves under stress for your own joy, drop it in the comments and let's celebrate that together. And let's try to give us some powerful examples of how to develop joy in our lives. Thank you for listening to Hands Free Drive to Work.